Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Olive-Harvey College, City Colleges of Chicago's The Socratic Project. This is number 15 in our series. The point of all of this is to help students and people in general to think critically, analyze things, and cultivate their minds toward the true, the good, and the beautiful. The best way I found to do that through my decade of teaching, wow, it's been 10 years already. I still love it. I'm surprised I get paid for it too. But the best way I found to do that is by engaging in conflicting worldviews with people who do not agree with you. People who would look at you and tell you you're wrong. Those are the types of environments that we can grow, because conflict is necessary for critical thinking and analysis. This is why it's very important to engage on topics in an academic setting so that we can deal with them in an everyday lifestyle. In the United States today, we are more polarized than we've ever been. At least that's what they tell us. Almost every generation says the same thing. But the polemics are extreme to the left and to the right. But nevertheless, there is a time for discourse, there's a time to grow, and there's a time for peace. And we hope that this time here will be a time where you can engage your minds and cultivate your spirits and really learn from our wonderful speakers who have arrived, taking time out of their schedule and their families to join us. George Orwell said it best. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. And ladies and gentlemen, just because you're offended about something, or because I'm offended, doesn't make me right. Matter of fact, it may make me upset, it may make me uncomfortable, but it might not make me right. How do I know if I'm right? I'll never know unless I start asking the critical questions. So, with that said, let's go ahead and get started with our process today. What I have here are two scholars, articulate members of our community, authors, and also, in their own right, movers and shakers in the field. They're going to take the positions and argue for them in as articulately as possible as they can. And hopefully we'll learn from that, and there'll be a chance for you to engage in some Q&A and questions and answers at the end. And if you hang around long enough, there may be some pizza and some other goodies. The format today will be 10 minutes of introduction, where one speaker will present his position and the other will give his 10 minutes. There'll be a 5-minute interaction of a rebuttal, after which there'll be a dialogue between all three of us. And then that's when the fireworks start, is when you get involved. So prepare your questions, prepare your analysis of what you want to say and how you want to say it. So help me welcome, at least before they come up here, our speakers. I'll give you a little bit of a background on them. The first one, Ted Williams III. Welcome, Ted. He has taught political science at Wright College, Chicago State University, and is currently chairman of the Social Sciences Department at Kennedy King College. He holds a degree in public policy studies from the University of Chicago and Rutgers University, and is a former host of WYCC's PBS television series, The Professor's Weekly Talk Show. He has provided political commentary of WGN-TV, NBC, Up Front with Jesse Jackson, PRI, Smiley and West, and WVON Radio, and a host of periodicals as well. He's an accomplished speaker and actor who has appeared in commercials, training videos for companies including McDonald's, Empire Carpet, Six Flags, Federal Express, Kraft, Accenture. Additionally, he's the author and producer of Torn the Musical, the book Way Out, Christianity, Politics, and the Future of the African American Community. He's also a recent contributor of the Third World Press, Not Our President. I wonder who he's talking about. Williams is former candidate for the Chicago City Council and hosts a number of national and local board positions. He's considered his most important work and role to be a mentor to young people, as well as a husband and father to Rosalind and their 3 beautiful children, Gabrielle, Aramis, and Ted, the fourth?
Yeah, the fourth.
The fourth, we're working on it. Welcome, Professor Ted. Our next accomplished speaker is Dr. Eric Wallace. He's a man of vision and focus. Dr. Wallace couples his rich educational background with a unique ability to challenge the status quo. His unique postgraduate degrees are in biblical studies, along with a master's theology, and as well as a PhD, together with his passionate and powerful message of inspiring, exciting change. Eric holds the distinction of being the first African American to earn a PhD in biblical studies from Union PSCE, now Pacific Union Presbyterian Seminary. So, great, well done. In 2006, Wallace ran for state senate in Illinois' 19th district. Dr. Wallace's campaign drew the attention of news sources and politicians. Over the last few years, he has served on the African American Advisory Board for the Republican National Committee as chairman of the African American Republican Council of Illinois, a member of the Outreach Advisory Board for Illinois' GOP, co-chairman of the Cook County Republican Party, and served as commissioner of the Illinois Transatlantic Slave Trade Commission. More recently, Wallace was a candidate for U.S. representatives in the 2nd Congressional District special election in 2013 and in 2014 election cycle. In 2008, Dr. Wallace began publishing Freedom Journal magazine, which I highly recommend to you. A political magazine aimed at encouraging African Americans to cling to their natural conservative principles. He has authored 2 books, Integrity of Faith, an autobiography, and Jesus on Trial, a unique presentation of Jesus in the Gospel of John. Both books are published by Integrity Books, a subsidiary of Freedom Journals Institute. In 2011, Dr. Wallace and his wife Jennifer, who is with us today, started the not-for-profit 501c Freedom Journal Institute for the study of faith and public policy. Dr. Wallace has also been called upon to give his opinion on TV and public radio. In public, too. Wow. A former pastor, adjunct professor, author, military, political candidate are all descriptions by others of Dr. Wallace. However, he has been recognized first and foremost as a believer in Jesus Christ, servant of God. That's how he identifies here. Welcome, Dr. Wallace. Dr. Wallace will give his first 10 minutes. Please give him your undivided attention.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Good evening, first of all. I want to thank you, Dr. Sweis, for inviting me to come. I want to thank you, students, for showing up and listening to Professor Williams and I bloviate or pontificate. I want to thank the college as well, and then my good friend, Dr. Williams. Professor Williams. I've got a lot to say here and very little time to say it. So I will get started. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We are all going direct to heaven. We are all going direct the other way. If you haven't recognized that, that's The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. We might add to this, at this time it was a time of tolerance and a time of intolerance. It was the age of Trump and political polarization. Well, this may be the cause and the reason we are here today. I want to start with not only the Tale of Two Cities, but the tale of two visions of America that underlie what we believe is, causes the polarization. The majority of the information I'm about to share comes from my reading of economists Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, both PhDs in economics. Dr. Sowell argues that political discourse amongst today's political parties is based on our visions of humanity. These visions are identified by Sowell as the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision, which is articulated in his book, Conflict of Visions, also called the tragic vision and the utopian vision. The constrained vision, or tragic vision, sees the restraints on human potential in its very nature. Humans have a number of unchangeable characteristics that restrain what can and cannot be expected or achieved. We are greedy, selfish, and driven by self-interest. We have based instincts that cannot be helped. Thus, there must be incentives to get people to do right. Moral codes and laws emerge naturally from the ancient wisdom of experience, and primarily, I would say, from God himself. The law must constrain the behavior of men, and in this way, cultural rituals, governments, and institutions are necessary checks and balances to help curb the baser instincts and save man from himself. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. There is no hope of stopping people from being selfish or greedy. So organizations must devise incentives to lure people into service. That's the constrained vision. Now the unconstrained vision, or the utopian vision, is this. In this vision, there are no natural limits on what humans can do or achieve, because human nature itself is seen as being contingent on social and environmental conditions. It's not that people are born this way. In other words, constrained visions say we're born sinners. But they're shaped shaped by our social and environmental conditions. This means that humans are perfectible in a way that seems to be impossible to those who hold a constrained vision like myself. According to this view, the main thing holding humans back from their fullest potential is not its nature, but rather its bad institutions and other such social contrivances. If only we could get those institutions right, if only we could somehow reconfigure society in such and such a way that the problems that have dogged humanity for centuries would go away, and the rest would follow, like war, poverty, racism. The unconstrained vision has come to dominate the political left and the academy. The consequences in holding this vision means that on the very fundamental things like equality, power, justice have been redefined. Their very definition also is changed by those words fundamentally. Those ideas fundamentally different. In the constrained vision, equality means equal rights under the law. Number 2, power is diffused and held by the people. Number 3, justice is a fairness of process. In the unconstrained vision, equality means equality means equal or some other outcome. Number 2, power is held by specific groups, interests, and concentrated to a few intellectuals. And number 3, justice is the fairness of outcomes. So having established the framework of the two competing visions, the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision, or utopia, let's look at our various topics for discussion. Gun control. The problem with discussing this issue is that those who hold the unconstrained vision act as though guns are the problem and not the owners of the guns. Guns don't shoot themselves. There are thousands and thousands of gun owners who obey the law. We don't need more laws. A couple of points. Number 1, the Second Amendment was written to protect us from a government that might overstep its bounds. People have a right to rise up against a government that has overstepped its authority. Number 2, guns are used to protect our family from unfriendly neighbors, wildlife, and hunting for food. Number 3, the first real laws against gun ownership were introduced to keep blacks from owning guns while they were making them vulnerable to the KKK. You can see the film, the video, No Guns for Negroes. Number 4, civil rights marchers in the South were protected at times by the Deacons for Defense, who carried shotguns. Number 5, I believe Professor Williams would suggest that we change the Second Amendment. I would say based on what? And at what cost? And what hard evidence do you have that somehow our society would be better if we did such a thing? As the constrained vision would say, people have a right to defend themselves because people are flawed, self-centered, and subject to violent acts. Violence happens not because of weapons, but because we're sinful. Cain killed his brother Abel before there were any guns or known weapons. Gun laws only restrict people who obey the law, not criminals. That's the definition of a criminal. You don't obey the law. Immigration. A sovereign nation has a right to determine or to decide who can enter our country and how long they can stay if they're not a citizen. If we can't control our borders from caravans of people crossing the borders, they're not immigrants, they're invaders. We must do whatever we think is necessary to control our ports of entry. There are real concerns about drugs, human trafficking, and health. When Ebola broke out in parts of Africa, anyone traveling from those parts to the U.S. were quarantined or sent back. However, what is more disingenuous is the Democrat reversal on immigration. Bill Clinton, in the State of the Union address in 1996, spoke about the problem of illegal immigration. He stated that we are a nation of laws, and those laws should be obeyed. Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer can be found online echoing the same sentiment that even President Trump has complained about. When Obama was in the U.S. Senate, he, Hillary, and Schumer and other Democrats approved the building of a fence in 2006. It was called the Secure Fence Act of 2006. They were to build a physical fence across the southern border. Now the economy works better when the government is resigned to being a referee and not a participant. The government is supposed to protect the market from monopolies and collusion. The minimum wage imposed upon employers is a job killer with a dubious history. Historically, the minimum wage was adopted to prevent wages for white people from plummeting because of free slaves and immigrant workers from China. The Davis-Bacon Act was authorized because white subcontractors would bring black craftsmen from the South and undercut the prices paid to northern whites. Because the cost of living was lower in the South, blacks could work for less money and do as good a job, if not better. However, the white unions got together and petitioned Congress to protect their labor. The Davis-Bacon Act of 1931 is a United States federal law that establishes the requirement for paying local prevailing wages on public works and projects for laborers and mechanics. So no longer did white contractors have an incentive to hire black workers. If price is no longer a factor, you might as well hire the white guy. So let me say this as I close on this subject. Raising people's human capital or skill sets is better than raising their wages artificially. Number two, the minimum wage, like the Davis-Bacon Act, makes it illegal to negotiate for wages. Number three, there is also an assumption by the unconstrained vision that those who are working and get a raise will keep their jobs or even their hours. But number four, why do you think it's okay to take away the power of negotiating for lower income people? And number five, what if we were to vote for your salary? It's arrogant and foolish to believe that we know better than the market what a person's skill set is worth. And lastly, people are paid for what they do, not for what they need or want. Black Lives Matter. We need to stop our confrontations and escalations and comply with law enforcement. Stop doing things, first of all, that bring the police in the first place. With today's proliferation of body cams, dash cams, cell phone cameras everywhere, let's deal with it in court. My biggest problem with BLM is that they do not respond to the abortion of thousands of black babies or the violence in the black community from gang violence. Thus, it sounds hypocritical when they say Black Lives Matter, but don't address the #1 killer of blacks in the nation, abortion. In fact, more than crime, more than accidents, more than cancer, heart disease, and AIDS, abortion has taken more black American lives than any other cause of death combined since 1973. Do Black Lives matter to black people? Me too. It's great to see women empowered to tell the stories of abuse. However, we must come to insist that people are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, not in the court of public opinion. Too many lives can be ruined by rushing to judgment and believing everything that comes out of a person's mouth without verification or cross-examination.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Sweis, for having me, and to my good friend, Dr. Eric Wallace. I think it is so important that we exchange ideas because that is really how we are educated. And being someone who's worked in city colleges now for 17 years, I have spent my life and career working to educate people. We're talking about politics, and they say that there are two things you should not talk about in polite company. If you want to have friends, you should not talk about religion, and you should not talk about politics. When I get together with Dr. Eric Wallace, that's all we ever talk about. And so you can imagine we have some very heated discussions, but they're good. I think it's very important that we understand through this process that it's okay to disagree without being disagreeable. And as I lay out my case for an opposite vision of America, I want to start by saying I promise to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and I will not lie to you. When I think about lying, I'm reminded of a story of a man who brought a robot back home for his family one day. That robot he brought because his family was spending a lot of time lying, particularly his younger son. And so the robot had a built-in lie detector test in it. So if someone was lying, the robot would roll over to the person and slap them in the face. So he wanted to test it out on his son. And in testing it out on his son, he decided that he was going to ask him a few questions. So he says, "Son, come here. Let me find out what you did today after school." And the son goes, "Oh, Dad, I came straight home and did my homework." The robot rolls over to the boy and slaps him immediately in the face. Then the boy goes, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was lying. I did not come home and do my homework. I went to my friend's house. However, we did our homework there." The robot rolls over to the boy again and slaps him in the face. At this point, the boy is just like, "Forget it. I mean, there's no truth coming out of me." So the father goes, "Son, this is ridiculous. I'm so disappointed in you. When I was your age, I would never lie to my parents." At that point, the robot rolls over to the father and slaps him in the face as well. Well, the mother is standing in the door watching all of this, and she sees them going back and forth, and she's just laughing. This is ridiculous, like father, like son. I mean, he is your son after all. The robot rolls over to the mother and slaps her in the face as well. So I promise today, I will not lie to you. It's important that we speak in truth. And so the question that I ask today for you and for me and for Dr. Wallace and for everyone who's listening on our Facebook audience, that sort of thing, is what kind of nation do we want? You have to ask yourself that question. What kind of nation do you want to live in? Do we want a nation where everyone has the opportunity to live the American dream? Or do we want a nation where the color of your skin, your gender, or your zip code limit your chances of success? Do we want a nation where corporations abide by these same rules as everyone else? Or do we want a nation where big businesses act in a parasitic fashion, avoiding taxes while benefiting from the same services those taxes provide? Do we want a nation where kids from any community can safely play in the park? Or do we want a nation where random gun violence threatens all of us, preventing us from enjoying the simple things in life? Do we want a nation where immigrants are welcome to bring their gifts, their abilities, and their experiences to the table? Or do we want a nation where they are vilified and subjected to xenophobic and racist fear-mongering? Which America do we want? I'm Ted Williams. I'm a professor, I'm an activist, I'm an artist, I'm a former candidate for the city council, but most importantly, I'm a husband, a father, a son, a brother, a friend. For many people, for my children and my family, in the age of Trump, the choice for our future could not be more clear. Today's conversation and debate is about whether the Republican or Democrat, the conservative or liberal vision is better for the future of this nation, and more specifically, for communities like the ones we live in here on the south side of Chicago. Let me lay out the two different visions. Conservatism, by definition, is a commitment to traditional values and ideas with opposition to extensive change. It's a holding of political views that favor free enterprise, private ownership, and social conservatism. Liberalism, by definition, emphasizes individual autonomy, equality of opportunity, and protection of individual rights, not only against the state, but also against private economic actors, specifically large businesses. To be clear, I'm not a partisan. I'm not an ideologue. I'm not blindly committed to the Democrats, nor am I blindly committed to the Republicans. For communities like the one I live on the south side of Chicago, there is value in both ideologies. We have to understand that. It's very important. I agree with my brother, Dr. Wallace, on a number of issues that impact us in the city. And we have worked together, particularly in the faith community, to lift a vision of a greater and more equitable and a more compassionate society. However, today's debate is about living in the age of Trump. In 2015, when Donald Trump announced that he was running for president, he changed the game. When he launched his candidacy on a platform of xenophobia, elitism, crassness, misogyny, blatant ignorance, and a lack of sensitivity towards the marginalized among us, he drew a line in the sand. In Trump's America, our choices could not be more clear. Donald Trump made independent people like me pick a side. Because it is clear that we must fight for what is right in times of great peril. In 1967, 1 year before Dr. King died, he made this statement that I think is so apropos to the time and the age that we live in. He said we must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, where machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. He could not have given us a more clear admonition for the times in which we live. Let's briefly talk about those three: militarism, materialism, and racism. Militarism, very quickly. We in the United States of America have more nuclear weapons than all the nations in the world combined, and we are the only nation in the world to have ever used nuclear weapons on another nation. The United States spends more on national defense than the next 7 nations in the world: China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, India, France, United Kingdom, and Japan combined. Last year, the Pentagon failed to spend an eye-popping $27.7 billion of the funds that it was allocated. They didn't even need the money. In light of this reality, what has our current president done? A month before they turned back that money, Donald Trump announced that they were going to increase the Pentagon spending by to a total of $750 billion for fiscal year 2020. That's an 8% increase. The Pentagon has more money than they know what to do with, and our current administration is giving them more. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a problem. Gun violence. Under this militaristic idea in this country, we export guns and violence around the world, and we live and peddle in guns and violence around this country in America. America is by far the most violent, industrialized society in the world today. With 300 million citizens, we have just over 300 million guns. There's a gun for every man, woman, and child in this country. We have about 13,000 people that die every year from handgun violence and 19,000 that die from suicide every year. Guns are used in 70% of murders in this country. The NRA will tell you that guns don't kill people. People kill people. I say that people with guns kill people. And when we have easy access to guns, it makes it much easier for us to live in a violent society. Now, Dr. Wallace mentioned that there's the possibility that people like me want to get rid of the Second Amendment. I don't want to get rid of the Second Amendment. I want to interpret the Second Amendment correctly, which has not been done in this country since the Second Amendment was passed in the late 1700s. The Second Amendment says very clearly, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia is the part of the Constitution that most gun advocates ignore very clearly. And the interesting thing about it, if you look in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution defines what a militia is, suggesting that the government would have control over the militia. The government would then be able to arm the militia, and the government would be able to appoint the officers and call the militia up for times of great chaos to enforce the laws or times of invasion. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not what we use guns today in this country. We believe in America that everyone should have a gun to protect me, my family, my house, etc. I tell my students all the time, if you want to have a gun in your house to protect your family, you better find another amendment, because that's not what the Second Amendment says. Now, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, my opinion is the minority opinion in this country. There was a major gun case in 2008 called Heller versus the District of Columbia, in which the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that Americans have a right, regardless of militia, to gun ownership. But interestingly enough, the 4 dissenting voices argued the exact same thing that I'm arguing. That the framers' intention was that we would have a militia during a time we had no standing army, but 5 justices, conservative justices, argued that gun rights should be universal. And that is where we stand today. I know we're almost out of time. I'm just getting started. I'm going to finish quickly, I promise. I told you 10 minutes was too much, and now I realize it's too short. Okay, so materialism. I'll do this quickly, and then racism last in Dr. King's vision. Understand, we live in one of the wealthiest nations to have ever existed. I'm very proud of that. But this country must deal with the great sin of inequality that exists as well. Amazon, the largest country in America, made $11 billion last year and did not pay a cent in taxes. Tell me how that is fair. Tell me how that makes this country greater. Tell me how the inequality, when 1 out of 4 people lives at less than $10 an hour in this country, tell me how that makes America great. The government must step in, and always has stepped in and acted as a mitigating force against capitalism. Capitalism is good, but when left by itself, it will exploit workers. America has always lived on cheap and free labor from the beginning. Indentured servants from Europe, African slaves, the prison industrial complex after the release of slaves. The 13th Amendment says that we have the right in this country to enslave people for labor, which makes no sense. We now live off of cheap immigrant labor from the southern border and also cheap labor from jobs we have shipped out to China and India. How can you tell me that capitalism plays fairly? It does not. Without the government, capitalism will exploit us, and it will make us a country of haves and have-nots. Last but not least, racism. Hate crimes have been on the rise for the last 3 years in this country, on average by 17%. We have a situation currently, racially, where the average African-American family is worth 1/8 what the average white American family is. We have a history of racism in this country that has not been dealt with, and until we deal with our history, we can never go forward. I will not talk about immigration for the sake of time, but I will say this, ladies and gentlemen. The idea that building a medieval wall to protect us from a foreign invader who is coming here to either work or run from political oppression, ladies and gentlemen, is illogical. And we should not peddle in fear-mongering, and we need to understand that and recognize this. Democrats don't want open borders. We just want borders that are fair and equitable, and we don't want the country picking people to come in the country based on their race and what country that they come from. Last thing I'll say, the statesman Edmund Burke said this very famously. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I hope I've laid out a case for why this current administration, this current ideology is bad for us. It's time for us to do better. Rather than making America great again, let's make America actually great for once, for all and